How do you write an effective one-shot for a shonen manga? This was a question that puzzled me for a long time as I was writing my own manga series. So, for some inspiration, I went back and reread the first chapters of all my favourite mangas, and something really interesting happened. I noticed that 3 of them all had a similar structure to their stories. Those being One Piece, Naruto, and My Hero Academia. So today I like to examine these 3 mangas and build a formula that should hopefully allow us to write our own opening chapter, and I believe that some of these points can even be used for most script writing. A quick heads up, I'll obviously be spoiling the first chapters for these series and there may be some light spoilers ahead. But with that out of the way, let's just get straight into the video on how to write an effective shonen manga one-shot. Let's begin with what most shonen mangas use to open up their stories with, and that is the simple yet effective tool known as the prologue. I must admit, I knew the gist of what a prologue was, but I didn't know the true definition, so to any of you in the same boat as me, a prologue is an opening to a story that establishes the context and gives background details, often with some earlier story that ties into the main one. So with this quote in mind, let's look at each of these mangas' prologues and establish what that earlier story and context can give us. In One Piece, we are introduced to Gold Roger, the Pirate King, who just before his public execution tells the entire world about his hidden treasure and gives a small hint about its location. We are told that this moment changed the history of the world and ushered in the Great Pirate Age. Without reading any further and just sticking to the prologue alone, what information can we gain about the upcoming main story? Well, there are 3 main things we can figure out: the setting, the genre, and the future plot points. Simply put, One Piece's setting will be in a world populated by pirates. We can also make the assumption that the genre will be an adventure story, with the future plot point being about someone discovering Gold Roger's hidden treasure. When looking at Naruto's prologue, we are told that there was once a 9-tailed demon fox that caused havoc, and that one brave shinobi sealed the demon away at the cost of his own life. We are told that this man was known as the 4th Hokage, champion of the Hidden Leaf Village. From this page alone, we can gather that the setting of this world will of course have supernatural elements and will be inhabited by powerful shinobi. We can also assume that there will be a future plot point on the sealing of the 9-tailed fox. Out of all the prologues, My Hero Academia actually gives us the most context and information about its world. It begins with the birth of an illuminous baby in China and explains that 80% of the world's population have developed unique abilities called quirks, and that the world has entered a new age with a society full of superheroes. As it is noted that the baby was born in China, we now know that the setting will be based on a fictitious Earth, and just with the inclusion of superheroes, we can infer that there will also be supervillains, there in itself creating future conflict just from creating the setting alone. There might also be a focus on the mystery of how mankind acquired these quirks, as it is noted that there was a time before this event. Now, I know this may all seem pretty simple, but with these examples, we can actually see the benefit of adding a prologue as it introduces your audience to the setting, genre, and future plot points of your manga before even entering the main story. But for me, and I think many others, the prologue should also strive to add as much intrigue and mystery as to make your audience curious enough to turn the page by forcing them to ask questions. What is Gold Roger's treasure and where is it hidden? Where did the 9-tailed fox come from, and where was it sealed away? Where did these quirks come from? Why do only 80% of the world's population have them? And what is a society full of superheroes actually like? These questions play a pivotal role in their correlated series, so your prologue should consist of a major plot thread that the rest of the series should build upon. Going back to the quote I mentioned before, that the prologue should provide context to the main story, we can see that all of these prologues have achieved this. When reading on, I'm not surprised that Luffy's goal is to become a pirate, as he's living in the pirate era, or that the 9-tailed fox was inside Naruto all this time, as we were just told it was sealed away somewhere. Or knowing that if the majority of the world had quirks, and you were in the 20% that didn't, well, that would kinda suck. One important thing to note as well is that these 3 mangas share one trait with their prologues, and that is that the prologue only takes up 1 page. with Naruto only just using one panel. So it's food for thought that if you do consider making your own prologue, to make it a short contextual opening. Lastly, I learned through trial and error that you don't need to explain all the rules of your world in your prologue, as your series should develop these ideas in the chapter and in later chapters. Boku no Academia doesn't explain All for One, One Piece doesn't explain about its world's geography or devil fruits, Naruto doesn't explain about chakra or the other hidden villages. It's mainly used as a tool to create some exposition to free up your story. Remember, dialogue is important, so you don't want to be wasting it over explaining to your audience where and when your characters are, when your prologue should have already done this. So with our prologue added and free from any unnecessary exposition, let's segue into the next section that usually starts off a chapter, and that is the introduction to the main character. Now, each of these mangas of course introduce their main characters in different ways, but they actually all do something very formulaic with them. That being that the first action demonstrated by each protagonist reveals a lot about their character. So I like to take this moment for us to just focus on each main character's first action. For example, when we're introduced to Luffy, he's holding a knife and is standing on the prow of a pirate ship. He then stabs himself in the face, attempting to prove to Shanks and his crew that he isn't afraid of pain. But what does this one action actually express about his character? Well, there are three things that we can kind of figure out. Firstly, it relays that Luffy is courageous, as it takes some serious balls to stab yourself in the face with a knife. Secondly, it conveys Luffy's stupidity, as this is a pretty idiotic way to prove to someone that you're immune to pain. And thirdly, it shows Luffy's impulsive nature. He does first and thinks later. All of these three traits combined create a scar on his face that is with him for the rest of his life, and a scar more importantly that symbolizes these traits. So just with this one key action, Oda has exemplified Luffy's character that becomes an inherent part of his personality. And if you're a fan of this series, you know that Luffy is renowned for being stupid, courageous, and impulsive. Naruto's introduction in the manga is actually different from the one provided by the anime. Naruto is swinging from a harness, vandalizing the faces of the Hokages on a rock face. Through the juxtaposition of a panel with the current Hokage, we are shown various parts of Naruto's personality. In this one action, we can learn that he is confident, clumsy, and reckless, but most notably that he's attention seeking, as he's graffitiing in broad daylight. Think about it for a second. He could have done this at night as to not have got caught, but it seems in fact that Naruto wants people to catch him, as we can visibly see in the panel an audience yelling at him. Eventually, through the chapter and through the series, we learn that Naruto seeks this attention and approval of others due to his own loneliness. And this trait of his personality is perfectly shown in just this one action. Deku's introduction is actually just before the prologue, highlighting that once you understand the formula, you can mess around with its structure. When we're introduced to Deku, he is trying to protect a young boy from 3 bullies and ends up getting beaten up himself. This mini story really conveys a lot about Deku's personality. First off, it shows Deku's bravery as he stands up against some bullies even though he is outnumbered. Though, instead of just having Deku being picked on himself, the writer introduced someone for Deku to protect, showing another aspect of his personality, his righteousness, as he is unselfishly putting himself in harm's way to protect an innocent boy. We can see in the second panel that Deku is also physically shaking, scared from the prospect of being attacked, again showing another side of his personality, his fearfulness. But what is brilliant about the execution of this introduction is that even though Deku is fearful, he still stands up against the bullies and takes the beating, highlighting Deku's most important trait, his defiance. This mini introduction really sells Deku's character, expressing 4 aspects of his personality in just one page, showing his innate bravery, his righteousness, his fearfulness, but most ultimately his defiance for justice. This becomes a common thread of emotions that occurs when Deku is presented to new and dangerous situations early on in the story. We can learn from all of these examples that when introducing your protagonist, their first action can be a really effective way to reveal key aspects of their personality. So you may want to consider constructing a specific scene that exemplifies these characteristics when introducing your own main character to your story. Ask yourself these questions. Who is my main character? How can I get across with one action or scene the main traits of my protagonist that will be consistent throughout the series? And also, can this introduction become the starting point for my plot to build upon? Of course, you don't need to follow all of these questions, but it's certainly something interesting to think about when writing your script. And having once noticed this, whenever I now watch anything, whether it be TV, movies or manga, I always pay attention to every character's introduction and analyze what it says about their personality. Now we've come to the meat of the video, and in all honesty, what could be considered the hardest part of creating any manga, or even any script for that matter, and that being an effective plot that conveys the story you want to tell. Just as there are many different ways to cook an egg, there are many different ways to come up with the plot of a story. But maybe first, let's quickly differentiate the difference between story and plot. To put simply, a story is just a sequence of events. Now, whether that story of events is good or bad is often on how it's told or how interested you are in it. This is where plot comes into play. Plot would be how we would construct, create, and place these sequences into trying to make our own stories more interesting. This entire topic of creating your story from plot alone is something I'll discuss later, but for now we're just going to skim the surface and look at 3 key elements in creating a simple formula to help us write our stories. As I mentioned with the analogy before of there being many different ways to cook an egg, whether it be scrambled, boiled, poached, fried, an egg is still an egg. And just like how many writers have different methods in creating their stories, at the end of the day, a story is still a story, and how you create that story is entirely up to you. However, using these 3 series, I like to look at one method that firstly focuses on creating a theme, which should then secondly inform character, and then thirdly, hopefully, making the whole writing process for your plot a lot easier. I'll try and explain it to the best of my ability and simplify it in a way that, who knows, maybe even someone watching this video could use it in the future. So, here we go. So, why did I choose theme first and not character or plot? The simple answer boils down to this question, and I think it should be the most important question for any writer. What is the story about? Or even more importantly, what is the story trying to say? Now, for most writers, I would imagine that you've already got a story in your head, so one really good place to start now would be to pick a theme. And we'll see how this will trickle down into creating a plot later. When analysing our 3 mangas, I'm not going to discuss the overarching theme of the series, just the main theme in the first chapter. Naruto's main theme would be loneliness. One Piece's main theme would be dreams. And My Hero Academia's main theme would be heroism. Now, of course, these are all very basic, one-worded explanations of themes, but I like to pull up a quote to better understand how themes can create a story. Theme is a poist, an argument explored and a conclusion reached. That, in a nutshell, is what theme is. Subject matter is a statistic given. Theme, on the other hand, is an active exploration of an idea. It's a premise to be explored. It's a question. With the themes now being picked by each of our mangakas, how does each one explore dreams, loneliness, and heroism, as there are so many different ways to tell stories about each of them? But let's just go back to that last part of the quote that simply says, it's a question. Because each of these series actually only asks one dramatic question about their respective themes and explores the idea of the question in their opening chapter. My Hero Academia's first chapter basically screams from its pages the question, can someone without a quirk become a hero? One Piece's question would be, is Luffy ready to start his dream of becoming a pirate? And Naruto's theme is loneliness. However, stemming from this expresses the question, how far would you go to get people to acknowledge your existence? So like I said before, realistically, most authors won't pick a theme from scratch to build their story from, as you'll need some inkling to go on as to find your theme. So let's just pretend that these mangakas, or yourself, have already got a rough layout with some scenes, characters, and plot points in mind. By having these ideas, we now have some clue of what the story is about, though it may seem a little rough around the edges now. One thing that we can do to help us is just to think of what the story is trying to say, and then pick a theme that best suits that idea. Use the story and theme you've created to ask yourself your own dramatic question and explore that idea in the chapter. And this is a brilliant way to set a foundation for your story, as you can now build upon this idea and start to formulate your own characters around it. With the questions for our manga's themes now being asked, we can now look how each manga has designed their protagonist to embody these questions. So let's look at how theme can now create a character. Naruto's main theme is loneliness, therefore the main character is battling with his own loneliness. But from this has actually given him a new goal to become Hokage, as he wants to become acknowledged by the people in his village. One Piece's theme is dreams, and has its main character a young boy who idolizes pirates and wants to become one. My Hero Academia's main theme is about heroism, and with the world populated by heroes, the main character is someone that aspires to become a great hero. Having the characters embody these themes has intrinsically now also created goals for the characters to reach. Naruto wants to be acknowledged, Luffy wants to be a pirate, and Deku wants to become a great hero. But of course it would be a pretty dull story if they all got what they wanted, so now we need to create some obstacles for them to overcome. And before we go into designing any external obstacles via the plot, we can actually create an important obstacle through the creation of our theme and character. That would be an internal obstacle. One way of doing this would be to create the lie the character believes, which is an idea from K.M. Whelan's book Creating Character Arcs. Quoting an extract from her book, she discusses, "The positive change arc is all about the lie your character believes. His life may be horrible, or his life may seem pretty great, but festering under the surface is the lie. In order for your character to evolve in a positive way, he has to start out with something lacking in his life, some reason that makes the change necessary. He is incomplete in some way, but not because he is lacking something external. Your character is incomplete on the inside. He is harboring some deeply held misconception about either himself, the world, or probably both." I should quickly explain that the majority of shonen titles would be categorized as a positive change arc, as the protagonist changes for the better over the chapter. With this being said, we can now use this technique to create a foundation of which our plot can build upon, as with this lie, we can create a beginning, middle, and end. The protagonist has a distorted view on the theme's question. The protagonist learns a new truth lesson throughout the chapter about the theme's question. The protagonist, having learned this new truth, ends the chapter now ready to start their quest, as they have gained a new outlook on the world and themselves. So through character alone, we've now created a story structure for our plot to build upon, as we now have a beginning, middle, and end. A very bare bones story, but a story nonetheless. So adding this simple structure to our mangas, let's see this process in action with using the theme's question first. Oda asked the question, is Luffy ready to start his dream of becoming a pirate? Luffy firstly starts off the chapter with his lie being that he believes that he is ready to become a pirate and head out to sea. He learns over the course of the chapter through Shanks of what it really means to be a pirate, and realizes that he isn't yet ready to become one. By the end of the chapter, Luffy finds his own dream in becoming a pirate captain with his own crew, with the last page showing him heading out to sea, ready to accomplish his new dream of becoming the Pirate King. So the answer to the theme's question would be no. Luffy wasn't yet ready to become a pirate, as he didn't even know what it truly meant to be one in the first place. As soon as he understood this, he realized his own worth in having his own dreams. And this is actually perfectly shown in a narration near the end of the chapter discussing Luffy's new truth. Kishimoto asked the question, how far would you go to get people to acknowledge your existence? Naruto's lie is that he believes no one acknowledges him or even cares about him. Through some deception, Naruto steals a secret scroll and learns from this that the real reason no one cared about him was because he had the nine-tailed fox sealed away inside of him all this time. However, from this truth, Naruto learns that Iruka has always secretly acknowledged him. He then ends the chapter embracing Iruka, knowing now that someone truly does love and believe in him. The answer to the theme's question would be, you may feel alone sometimes, but there will always be people that can empathize and love you even if they don't show it all the time. My Hero Academia asked the question, can someone without a quirk become a great hero? Deku actually starts off the chapter with his lie being that he believes he can become a hero without a quirk. However, deep down he's trying to find some validation to that claim. Through the chapter, Deku is belittled by his peers and even his own mum. When he finally meets his idol, All Might, he learns that, no, he wouldn't be able to become a hero without a quirk, as All Might shows a scar on his stomach highlighting the dangers that heroes encounter. Disheartened from this new truth, Deku still attempts to try and save his friend from a dangerous villain, and by doing so teaches All Might a lesson that he'd forgot. By the end of the chapter, All Might tells Deku what he's always wanted to hear, that yes, anyone can become a hero. We are then told through a narration from Deku in the future that this will be a story of how he'll become a great hero. The answer to the theme's question would be yes and no. Anyone without a quirk can become a hero and easily run to try and help people, but you'll need more than courage to become an effective hero to save people in the future. And with this, we can acknowledge a common misconception about theme, that being that you don't need a finite answer to the thematic question. Going back to the quote we mentioned before, we can see that theme is just an active exploration of an idea and a premise to be explored. It doesn't need to have a concrete answer. And this is why I love stories, as other readers can find their own answers in the narrative of what the story is trying to convey. Anyway, that's kind of my readings of these first chapters, and to be honest with you, my point here is that your ending doesn't have to be so black and white as you're led to believe. Now that we have a structure for our plot, there is also one more thing that we can gain from still creating our character, and that is the thing that they can't do. There's probably a better term for this, but I'm more of a fan of basic phrases to express ideas. This was something I missed first time reading, but reading them again, I realized each of the protagonists actually has a unique major flaw to themselves that makes their goals harder to accomplish. This would be an external obstacle, but formulated through the creation of our character. That being that your protagonist should lack a major skill in helping them achieve their goal. Basically, every character has something they can't do, and by the end of the chapter will have overcome it. Luffy wants to be a pirate, but he lacks any solid fighting ability. This is shown when he easily loses to the bandits, again underlying the theme's question that he isn't yet ready to become a pirate. He overcomes this by the end of the chapter by training himself to become strong enough to head out to sea by himself. And this is highlighted when he punches that big sea monster that tried to eat him when he was younger. Naruto wants to be acknowledged but can't even make a stable clone of himself to pass a school exam. This is shown in the classroom scenes at the beginning of the chapter. This propels Naruto through the narrative to steal the scroll and learning a new technique to help him pass the exam. And by the end of the chapter, we see that he has now mastered this new skill, with Iruka giving him a headband allowing him to move forward in his goals. Deku wants to be a superhero, but he hasn't yet proved to himself that he can. And through the chapter, he actually does a lot of heroic things like jumping on All Might's legs and trying to fight a villain stronger than him, just like a superhero would. This proves to All Might that he can become a hero, and through the narration we're told that Deku has already become a great hero in the future. With the chapter starting with Deku wishing to become a hero to actually becoming one, and with the last page leaving us with such a curious open-ending question, we ask ourselves, how will Deku achieve this without a quirk? Obviously in chapter 2 we learn about All For One, but without Deku proving to himself and All Might that he can become a hero, he wouldn't have had this opportunity in the first place. By the end of the chapter, we see that each protagonist has overcome their external obstacle, having them accomplish a new skill that now allows them to progress into the next chapter. Now let's go back and see what we've learned from all of these 3 mangas. From creating a short prologue, it allowed us to give our audience context to the history and world our story will inhabit. We then created a specific scene to introduce our protagonist that would best express the characteristics that will be consistent with them throughout the series. And from just choosing one simple theme, we created a thematic question which we then had our protagonist embody. With the protagonist embodying these questions, it then also provided us a goal with each of them to achieve. We then added an internal lie and an external obstacle that were all unique to each of our protagonists to overcome. And by having these ingredients, we were then able to come to our own conclusion on the thematic question, with us ending the story having our characters now capable to progress into the rest of the series. There in itself, creating a simple guide on how to write your own effective shonen manga one-shot. So hey guys, I'd just like to make it clear that I'm not suggesting that these stories use these techniques in creating their scripts. Instead, I just created a formula to help me better write my own. And it's important to note that there are loads of mangas that this method wouldn't work on, and there are so many different ways to create a story. Some people start the other way around and write the plot first and then create the characters, and from this then create the theme. I mean, one example of this could be Death Note. This is a story that could have easily been birthed from just the plot alone. Having a diary that can kill people whose names are written inside is just such a cool concept. And then from this, the creator could have just thought, who would be the best character to have this book? And from this created Light Yagami, a genius high school student who wants to get rid of all the evil in the world. And from this created the theme's question: is killing all the world's criminals good or evil? So you can see how it can work the other way around. I've also compiled a short list of all the points that we've covered in today's video in the bio below, so if you'd ever like to use them, here you go. Lastly, I think it's fair that we should address a common debate about story structure. The main criticism I hear in the writing community is that structuring a story makes it too formulaic, and therefore doesn't allow the writer enough creative freedoms to express themselves. And to be honest with you, I used to think like this as well, but one thing that I think is true above all else is that the most famous films, TV series and mangas were all written by people who followed some sort of structure to ensure that they could tell the best story of their ability. Just because something is structured doesn't mean you can't be creative. In fact, I'd argue it the other way around. I think it allows you to become more creative as you have to think of new and innovating ways to create a story. And this is how stories evolve. But this is also why I didn't delve too much into the plot, world building and side characters, because I believe this type of formula may be effective for some writers as it gives a simple structure to follow, but allows everyone as much creative liberties as possible. And finally, thanks to anyone that made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it. I hope to make some similar videos like this in the future, so if you could like and subscribe to the channel, that would be super awesome. Please put any links in the comments, as I'd love to read some people's scripts or any new mangas out there. And with all that said, everyone have a dope day.